Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and I am very happy to welcome back John Barclay. Hey John.
Hello, Nicole. Happy to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yes, John is here to show us how he's been using some of the latest Topaz plugins to craft his images. We are happy to have him back with us today, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you, John.
Excellent. Good. Well, welcome back to all those who are back for yet another installment. Nicole and I just chatted, and this is the 17th webinar that we've done together, which I'm grateful for the opportunity. It always surprises me that people keep coming back, Nicole, so that's a good thing. It's a good surprise. But thank you to my good friends at Topaz. We've had a wonderful relationship for a number of years. They make great products, and I'm happy to share some of my thoughts about what's going on in my workflow. So what we'll do today is we'll cover the new texture effects and how you might think about using it in a few different scenarios. And then I want to just make sure to remind people how wonderful Clarity is. People ask me what are my favorite Topaz plugins, and Clarity always comes right to the top. And then the black and white software is really good as well. So I thought I'd just cover those quickly as well. So once again, as we flip over to Photoshop here, because I have some things lined up and ready to go to make things go a little more quickly, I always like to start off by sharing philosophically what I'm trying to do today. I'm not trying to make perfect pictures today. You have X amount of time, so my job really is to give you some ideas and techniques that you might be able to then employ. So to help you really understand how to use the software and what you might consider using it for. So with that, on into this wonderful playground called Texture Effects, and it's really like having a box of crayons. It's so much stinking fun. So let's get this set up so we can see it properly here. Okay, so when we start looking at texture effects, like any other piece of software from Topaz, they do a great job, and it's mostly Nicole making all these wonderful presets. But it's worth taking a minute just to discuss how you might find presets. You'll always start with featured up here on the top right. You'll see some featured presets, and then if we open up this dialog box, we can see some other categories. But what you might not know is these three dots between the new and between the list here gives us three different ways to search for a look. You might consider using tags, and we'll do that now, and you'll see the difference. So once I go to tags, now this list will be a list of those things that include that tag. So in this case, we might want to go to landscape. So now we've narrowed down the set of looks that are available for you here. Excuse me. And makes it just a little easier to find things that might apply to the type of photograph that you're looking to use the software with. So all we have to do is click on something, and we can get an idea, a preview very quickly of what it looks like. We'll cover why you might want to use search in another photograph later on, but right now you can look. We've kind of looked at collections, which is the default. Tags will allow us to look for things that are tagged. By the way, tagged out in the community, which I'm not going to cover again this time. I didn't last time either, because it does go a little slow because it's connecting out to the community online. Or it'll also search for, so it can do either or, the community and or those are just reside on your computer with those tags, if you will. So if you do landscape and you're connected to the community where people are creating looks and submitting them to Topaz, it would search all of those as well. But let's just pick a preset here, and let's just choose cloudy. You'll notice that you have a bunch of sliders that come up in the middle of this when you click on it, right? So if I come down, whoops, let me go back here. So if I go down to this one, the sliders are on that. If I go to this choice, the sliders are on it. If I click on the sliders, which I've just done, that will reveal to me the adjustment panels, I like to call them, that have been used to create this look. I would suggest that you do this. I would suggest you go in and turn each one of these off one at a time, starting from the last one, and move up by clicking on the eyeballs so that you can get an idea of what's happening and decide whether you want what this preset offers or not. Presets are wonderful. They're a great starting point. But normally, because I want to create what I feel is my vision, I might use a preset as a starting point and then do exactly what I'm showing you here or suggesting you might do and decide, you know what, the film grain really isn't doing anything. Well, in that case, just simply come over to the right side of that particular layer, hit the trash can, and it's gone. I like what the vignette does. I'll leave the vignette. I'm not sure I need to have dust and scratches added to this particular look, so I'll hit the trash can here as well. And then we're left with these three, and I think they do what I need them to do. Although it's interesting, in this particular preset, nothing is happening in the basic adjustment panel. So arguably, I could delete it, or I could use it to lighten and brighten. I'm just going to leave it there, as I might want to use it later to do some adjustments. So it's fine to leave it there. It's not going to hurt anything. The next thing you need to understand is each one of these layers, and by the way, a layer is created by simply adding this adjustment. So when we do that, these are the types of layers we can add. And here you can see basic, like we see at the top. Down here is a texture, like we see as our second layer. And vignette is here as our third layer. We can add more should we want to, and we'll do that in a couple of other examples here. What you need to understand, and it's really important, is just because this is here, turning it on and off is one choice. More importantly, you need to understand if I roll that open and I'm just hitting that little triangle, I now can see a whole bunch of power underneath the hood of each one of these adjustment layers. So let's explore a little bit what's going on with this adjustment layer. You can move, meaning if I click on the move tool, I can move that, this particular case, the texture where I might want it. I might want it in a different place. I can make that texture bigger or smaller with this slider. I can flip it. I can flip it vertically or horizontally. The opacity, I can change the opacity of that particular texture. The detail adds more detail, and by the way, it's just on the texture. That's important to understand. It's not affecting the detail of the image behind it. It's affecting the texture, I'm sorry, the detail of the texture only. We'll talk about the saturation, color strength, and color here in a minute, because that becomes kind of fun actually and gives you a lot more control than you might realize. One of the most important things, especially with your texture layers, is the blend mode. The blend mode, if we roll this open, is full of all of these choices. And one of the beautiful things about this piece of software is how lightning fast it is. So as I roll over these different choices, I can see the effect that they will have and make a choice with that. Keep in mind, though, when you're using blend modes, just because you think it's not doing something, it might not be doing something until you play with the opacity slider and the detail slider. So you need to play a little bit to learn and understand what overlay and soft light are going to do versus linear light versus multiply. They're all going to have different effects, and you'll use them for different reasons. I wish I could give you an answer as to which one will you use when. I can tell you for my workflow that I tend to use multiply, I tend to use overlay, soft light, and linear light, and normal actually sometimes as well works too. So you're going to need to play with those a little bit, but the linear light is what's being used in this particular preset. Now, just because this preset had that texture, that might not be the texture that I am thinking of. I may have other textures in my arsenal, and just so happens that I do. So the next thing I want you to understand is you can add any textures you want. I'm a Flypaper texture fan, so I have a bunch of Flypaper textures. Kathleen Clemens, who does beautiful texture work, has a beautiful set of textures you can purchase from her. You can do that and then load those. So real quickly, when you're on a texture layer All you have to do is click this box to the right with a down arrow, meaning it's download. If I click on that, I can now import whatever I want. So I can go and create, and I would encourage you to do this. So what I would have done first is, let's say I wanted to add these flypapers. The first time I did that, I came down to the bottom, I hit add category, I called it flypaper, it created that category, I made sure to highlight that category called flypaper, I hit import, and then it went out to, it gives you a dialog box where you can now go out and find where that texture set was and import that. Obviously, I've already done that. I'm not going to do it again. But now I have all of these subcategories of purchase textures that I've made. So once again, if you want to add your own textures, it's as simple as going up. When you have a texture layer open, that's where you're going to find it, is when you have a texture layer open, hit the download arrow. That'll bring up the dialog box to add a category and add those. Okay. So let's go here. Let's go to the flypaper, and let's take a look at this. And this tends to be, again, I just love flypaper textures. I like this look a lot better. Something I just want you to see is how quick, or how fast, I should say, these textures are appearing as I scroll through these. It gives me a real quick opportunity to get an idea of how I feel about them. I'm going to pick this one because I love the amber tonalities that's adding. Now, once again, I have the ability to make that texture bigger or smaller. I can change the opacity, so I'll bring it up just a little bit and add a little bit of detail should I want to. Okay, let's show you just another idea here with the saturation tool. If the saturation is adjusting the saturation, again, simply of the texture layer, it's really important to know. It looks like it's affecting everything, but these tools are specific to the layer that you're working on. So if you have basic adjustment, it's only going to be affecting that. Actually, basic adjustment is going to affect the underlying underlying image. But in this case, it's only affecting the texture. So if I bring the saturation all the way down, we can still see the texture left behind, but the tonality, which you can see here, which is a very dark amberish orangey color, has been removed. Well, look how cool this is. If I leave the color strength up, I can now change the color of that texture with the color slider. That's pretty stinking cool, really. So the color strength, bring it up a little bit so you can see what's happening. And now instead of the amber color, I can make it whatever color I want to. That's a really powerful little tool. So I'm going to turn this all down and go back to the normal saturation, which would be to bring this to roughly 0. And just to pile on top, if you want to, I can leave the saturation up. I told you first to remove the saturation if you want to create your own color, but there's nothing wrong with leaving the saturation up and then adding in this color as well, right, and tweaking it, something like that. So lots of capability on each layer for you to add whatever you need to. Next thought, just because I have one texture layer and then I have this vignette layer, so let's roll this up now and see what we have here. If I click on the image, anywhere on the image, I can see what I started with, and then I can see what I have. Now let's take a look. We might want to get rid of that vignette. It's making maybe a little too dark at the corners. So come in and throw that away if you want to. And now I might want to go back to that basic adjustment panel, roll that open, and maybe add some brightness because it did darken things up. Just a little side note on these sliders. Brightness does not operate the way brightness does in an image editing piece of software, for instance, where it's affecting everything. They're really separated very nicely. So brightness will not open up all those shadows as much as they typically would with another brightness slider. Same thing with shadows. Shadows will open up those shadows but not do much to those midtones or bright highlights. So think about brightness as a midtone slider. Think about your shadows as doing just that, opening up or darkening the shadows. Think about highlight as just brightening up those really bright areas without affecting the midtones or the shadows. It's really nice. They've done a nice job of implementing those sliders. And then if you want to add what I would call local contrast to give it some punch and snap, you're going to do that with the clarity sliders, where it's going to add some local contrast to the overall scene, and it's doing a nice job in this case to those mountains where you have that distant haze. And then the saturation, temperature slider, and tint are pretty much self-explanatory. The only thing I want to do is go back to this texture layer now, and just one last thing. You have an opacity slider here, and then notice in your basic adjustment you have an opacity slider there. The bottom line is you have an opacity slider for any layer that you create. So take a look at after you're done and decide, do I want to bring those adjustments I've made, in this case on the basic adjustment panel, and fine tune and tweak those or not. Okay. I think that's what I want to cover on this one to get started. I'm sure there might be questions at the end. I'm gonna hit cancel to let go of this one and move on to the next one. Okay, so how about things like flowers? Can we use texture effects for that? Well, let's take a look. So here we are once again. If I come up here, it's on custom because that's the last thing we did, and those are sticky settings. I can come and say, hey, let's do tags, and let's see, there's still life, that might work. Landscape or nature might work, but in this case, I just want to go and start from scratch. So how do I do that? Well, to the right, to the very top right, it says new. If I hit new, I don't see any of the presets anymore. So in that case, I can build my own look from scratch. So that's what we're going to do. Let's hit add an adjustment, and I can pick and choose whatever I want to do. And in this case, I think I'll pick a texture. And because, again, I like Flypaper, I'm going to go to Flypaper Painterly, which tends to be something I like to do. And if we start to look at these, remember, and this is where you'll get stuck sometimes, the default, let's come down here, is normal blend mode. I find normal blend mode doesn't always work for doing texture work, so I might go to multiply, or again, I might go to overlay or something like that. In this case, let's select overlay, and that gives us a really good, let's click right away, a really good idea of what that particular texture might do. Now when I scroll over all of these textures, I'll have a much better idea of what they're going to look like in reality. So it's just a matter of picking something to taste, something subtle in my mind. It works best for these types of images. So I'll pick this to start with, and once again, just by way of review, I can make that texture bigger or smaller. I can flip it if I want to, because I don't like the way that a dark part of that might be falling into the image, and that's common, by the way. So there might be a dark part of the texture or a lighter part of the texture, and you might want to flip it so that it's in the top right or the bottom left or what have you. And then I can add a little bit of detail and bring out more of that texture if I want to. I don't think I want to in this particular case, but I do, and I'm pretty much done adding the texture here. So let's add a basic adjustment and brighten things up just a little bit again, because the texture added a little bit of darkness. So I'm going to bring the shadows up just a skosh, and the highlights really bring that yellow to sing. And I'm not going to do much with the clarity at all. As a matter of fact, I think I'm just going to leave it pretty much as is. But I'm going to go grab another adjustment layer. Again, that's every time you want to add something, just go to the add adjustment. In this case, diffusion would be kind of nice on a floral. So let's add a little bit of diffusion, which is going to soften things up just a little bit. And you can soften it even more by bringing the softness slider over, but typically the strength is what I work with, and the blur is going to, blur it even more and make it softer. So these are just choices you make based on taste for each particular look that you're creating. And then, of course, you have this opacity slider once again, where you can fine-tune the look that you're creating. So we start with just a basic nice floral shot, but we've added a little bit of texture and a little bit of diffusion, used the basic adjustment panel to help bring back some of the life that the texture can oftentimes bring away from the image. Okay, so let's cancel out of that one. Let's move to the next one. So how about on people pictures? What do we think about here? Let's give it a try. Let me just check my notes and make sure I'm going to be using the right things here. Okay, so let's go here. I'm going to hit the back arrow on custom so that I can see all of my presets. And in this case, remember I said that we're going to look a different way. Rather than collections or tags, which we've covered, I'm going to search, and I happen to remember there was a fairy something or other preset that I liked. So if I just go up and hit, again, these three dots and make sure that I'm on the search choice, and then come in here and put fairy and hit enter, it's going to go find any preset that might be sitting out there that had the fairy in that title. And in this case, it found this one that I rather like, which is Fairy Light 1. So here's the picture of my granddaughter, my sweet little Abby. She's a little older now, with a neat preset. But once again, it's rarely ever what I want to finish with. So I'm going to hit the sliders so that I can go see what Nicole did to create this wonderful preset. I'm going to click things off so I have an idea of what's going on. And I can see all of what's going on, build it back up again. I kind of like everything she's doing. But what I don't like is that the diffusion is diffusing her eyes. And in my mind, on portrait work, you really want to have sharp eyes and a sharp mouth. Well, guess what? If I roll this open, I can see the sliders so that I can fine tune this to my taste, but every one of these panels has a masking capability. So you can mask with a spot mask or a brush. I'm going to go ahead and hit brush. Now I can paint with black or I can paint with white, right? It's already a white mask, so I'm going to paint with black to conceal. Black conceals, white reveals. And I can make it the strength high or low. If I'm at 100%, it's going to remove 100% of that diffusion. And the brush size can be made bigger or smaller. And then the hardness has to do with how soft of an edge of the brush is. So the further to the left, the softer the brush, further to the right, the harder the brush. I'm going to make it a pretty soft brush. I'm going to make the size of the brush something that I can paint in the eyes with, something like that. I'm going to do it 100% just for speed here. Normally, I would bring this down to 10, 20-ish%. And the reason I would do that, and I'll go ahead and do that now, is each time I paint, it's going to paint, in this case, with 20-ish%, 22%. If I let go and then paint again, it's cumulative. If I let go and paint again, it's now basically I'm up to 60%. In this case, I know I want to remove pretty much all of that diffusion from her eyes, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 100% and remove all of the diffusion from her eyes and all of the diffusion from her lips. Again, just normally, because it can sometimes look like you hit it with a sledgehammer if you leave your strength at 100% when you're masking. So oftentimes you want to work with a much lower strength brush so that you can gently and lovingly paint away or in, as we'll do in another situation here, what you want. Okay, so what we've learned on this one so far is that even though there's a diffusion panel, you don't need to have diffusion on everything, and in this case I don't want it on the eyes. Really simple, go grab that mask and get rid of it. Okay, let's roll that back up. But you know what? I'd love to bring out even more detail in Abigail's eyes. Let's add another adjustment layer and let's get another basic adjustment layer. And one of the great tools to bring out all that detail and make those eyes really sparkle is the clarity slider. But as I bring that over, obviously it can make everything look really grungy when I push it too far. So I'm only looking at her eyes. I don't care about anything else because I'm going to get rid of that very easily. So I bring the clarity over. I see that it's making her eyes sparkle the way I'd like, but I want to get rid of it everywhere else. Well, here's the easy way to do that. Come down to the brush again. And as we do this, one of the other choices I have is to hit the invert way here to the right, so hopefully you can see my cursor here. So paint with black or white, you can undo, redo, reset, and if I invert, now I've made my mask black. Remember, black conceals. So now I've concealed the adjustment of clarity that I've made in this basic panel. And now I can do the same thing again. I can go, and in this case, I am going to bring this down. I'm going to make my brush size about the size of her eye, a little smaller. Oh, come on. There we go. And then I'm going to paint in, oops, I'm sorry, I got to paint with white now. Remember, I made my mask black, so in order to now reveal the clarity adjustment, I need to paint with white, not black. And now I do that, and each time it's cumulative, and now hopefully you can see, we'll turn this on and off here. And in this case, again, just so you can see it, I'm going to do what I normally wouldn't do. I'm going to bring it to 100%. And paint the eyes and paint the mouth. And now I'm going to turn the eyeball off on this adjustment panel here, and hopefully you can see that her eyes now are really sparkling. They're a little whiter, and most importantly, that the eyeballs themselves really come out at you. So Texture Effects works really well. Obviously, you're not going to use really heavy, grungy textures, although if you want an affected look, you're welcome to do that. But I think it's makes for a nice tool to add a slightly different look. So here's what we started with, and here's what we ended up with, adding a nice diffused kind of washed out look. There's a light leak in there that I kept in there, which was kind of fun. And then we showed you how to use the masking tools to remove or add what you might want to. Okay, got lots to cover. The time always goes so stinking fast. Okay, here's a wonderful tree shot. I'm going to do I'm going to make it black and white first. So I'm simply going to hit a black and white tool. That's all I'm going to do. I'm going to collapse that layer and then hit a Command-I to inverse it. I always like to warn people, that doesn't mean you're always going to do this. It's just something I tend to do for tree type images, because then the texture is going to show really well through this. So you don't always have to do this. This is just an unusual example of inverting, but I like to show it because I think it's kind of a fun technique, excuse me, and a real good use of textures. So now if we go into, let's say, Flypaper 2, and then I'm going to come down here, and in this case, I know probably multiply is going to work the best. And once again, something like this, and bring that texture color up. I'm sorry, bring the opacity up. Let's check out what hard light does, vivid light does. We get some different looks that way. I really think I like multiply the best. I'm going to have to do some work on this either in Photoshop, because multiply tends to flatten out your tonalities, but it gives you the most robust color most of the times. And if I don't like what I'm getting there, hey, I can just go look at my painterly textures and find something else. And go to blue tones or what have you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the capabilities. There's a nice dark color, and then you can come in, add a basic adjustment, and bring those highlights back up, bring the brightness back up, maybe make the shadows even darker if you want to make it look kind of, really dark and moody in your face. So if you have tree type images, you might want to consider inversing or something like that. Okay, let's see, what is the last one I have here already open? Ah, that's right. One last quick one. We did this on the last, when I did the first Texture Effects webinar, when they had just released the program. Something that you might not know, and you can do this just with a texture layer and have them in there, but what they've given you is a double exposure. So once again, I'm going to go to build this from scratch. So I'm going to go add adjustment and double exposure, and then the same thing for double exposures. You can go and look at what you've put in there yourself. Okay, so these are images I've put in there, and how did I get those images in there? The same way as a texture layer. So as long as I have my double exposure layer open, if I want to add images that I might use I can just do the same thing, and I can call them my images for double exposures, which I did, and I added some in there, or I can, create sample images down, whatever you want to call them, and you can add those in there. And I just think this horse, so I have a Wrangler just out in Wyoming, did a great workshop out there, and here I can make my silhouetted rider a little bigger by using the size tool. I can flip that so that the rider's over on this side, and maybe get the move tool and move that rider up to a more logical position. I think you get the idea. I just want to show you that you can do double exposures very easily in the software too, and they become quite a lot of fun. Don't forget to check what's going to happen with your blend modes, right? So, because you're going to get very different looks depending on which blend mode you're using and depending on what look you're looking for. Okay, and then same thing, you can check the opacity. If I go all the way to the left, it's going to show the background image. All the way to the right, it's going to show the overlaid double exposure image. So I can pick and choose how I want which image to be predominant, if you will. And then all the other things we're talking about here, we can add. So we can use another adjustment layer, can add diffusion. All those things can be added to the double exposures as well. It's just an easy way to create a cool double exposure look. Okay. So let's come back here, and we're happy to answer some other questions about texture effects, but I do want to make sure to cover, because Topaz has so much more than just texture effects, although that's become like my playground lately. It's just so much fun. But I do use their products in most of my workflow. So I just want to review why you might want to do that. Let's come to this image. Now, Lightroom is fantastic. It's a great tool, and if I hit the backslash key, we can see where I started on this image, and through some work in Lightroom, I've done a pretty good job, and I've even can use clarity here, but those who know my workflow, as much as I like clarity here, and I'll use it from time to time, I really find that the clarity tool in Topaz to be so much more powerful. So let's do that. Let's head on out. I'm just going to make this a slightly smaller file size so it goes a little faster. So let's edit this in. And in Lightroom, there's a few of their plugins still that you need to go through. Fusion Express, it's a free plugin, and then that brings up this panel so we can see. So I'll get clarity and run it this way. Okay, looks like it's brought it way over here on this screen, so let me bring it over here. Okay, so there's lots of presets as usual with clarity. I honestly don't use any of them. I just have gotten into a habit of just using my own techniques here. And what I tend to do is I tend to pull this one over to roughly 30, then to roughly 20-ish, and then I pull these down to the left a little bit as off times where I tend to like things. Okay, so it made things a little grungy there, and you might say, what the heck is he doing? Because here's beginning and here's after. But anytime that you add contrast, and that's what you're doing in the software, you tend to move your histogram quite a bit. So let's take a look. Top right of the software, we do have a histogram. And look, we're blowing out the highlights on the right, and we're blocking up the shadows because of the maneuvers I've done here. What makes clarity so cool is the tone sliders below. So it's adding the really gorgeous contrast, and the reason I like it so much better than just the one sledgehammer approach in Lightroom is it gives me 4 different regions, if you will, of contrast: high, medium, low, and micro, that I can manage that apparent sharpness, if you will, or that clarity that I'm adding to my image in a much more refined way. But because it's moving my histogram around, I need these tools. And so all I have to do, let's address the blacks first. If I now bring this to the right, I can open up those blacks that are being blocked up again, just as simple as that. I'm going to bring it over a little bit more. And then my whites, I'm going to go and I'm going to pull those to the left, right, to recover those that are being blown out, maybe a little bit too much there. And now you'll start to see the magic of what's going on here. So now before, after. Wow, right? I mean, look how the detail on that horse, the detail on the rider, and the way that horse and rider are now set off from the background when we had a real cold, frosty day. I think that's tremendous. And so I can't do that as easily. I mean, it would be a lot more effort in Lightroom to get that, but this tool is great. We're not done. We have a hue, saturation, luminosity panel below this. So not only can we work on clarity from within the Topaz Clarity plugin, I can now work on, by rolling open this, the hue, saturation, or luminosity, and I simply have to click any one of these that I want. So this is the hue, saturation, or the luminosity. Well, why might I want to do that? Well, I might want to, in this case, go to the saturation, and some people might not want this blue in the snow. So let's remove the blue in the snow and the blue in the background, or at least remove part of it, right? And so that the snow is a little whiter. Wow, really nice capability. Unfortunately, it's removed all of that nice blue in the rider. Well, guess what? Our friendly mask is back. In this case, the mask is up at the top, and I can either hide or reveal it. So rather than painting in white or black, they've named them, so it makes it a little easier. Once again, I can have a brush with a certain strength and a certain size, and I can come in here and I can start to paint back where I want that. And look how great. So this has, and I would encourage you to use the edge aware brush, by the way. There are others. There's a normal brush, or there's a color aware brush. The edge aware brush, and then setting the brush size and the hardness, allows you to very quickly paint here. And let me go to where you can see the brush. Notice that the inside circle on the brush, that's, as long as I'm painting with that inside circle and not going off of them. So if I go into the trees with that inner circle, well, that's going to grab too much. But if I keep that inner circle inside of his shirt and inside of his face, and then that outside circle, it doesn't matter. That's where the feathered mask is, and it's not going to grab that. Look at the mask up here in the top right. Look how refined that mask is. I can see his hat and the shape of his body and so forth. That's how good the edge aware mask is at only masking, and in this case, masking out and this is only for the hue saturation. So in this case, it's only on the saturation. I want that blue to come back. So anyways, here's the beginning. And here's the end. I removed some of that blue. You may or may not want to do that. Again, I'm just trying to give you ideas of how you can use it. And then if it removes it for somewhere where you don't want it, just open up a mask if you want to. By the way, that clarity has a mask as well, right? So both the hue sat and luminosity panel in clarity and the clarity can be masked. So you don't have to have clarity in the entire image if you don't want it. Okay, cancel out of that real quickly. Okay, so let's go back here. Same thing, whoops. We'll right click, edit in, and we're going to need to go to Fusion Express. Again, that's a simple plugin that you get from Topaz, which allows you to then have this panel come up. That'll come up next. Same thing, if you notice as we're waiting, I've got a lot of clarity and vibrance already in this photograph of the wave. But once again, I really want to bring out the depth of this wave even more so. So let's do the same thing just to drive home the point. I can really bring out the clarity of that, but it's certainly affecting my tonalities, so I want to make sure to bring that black level up so that I'm not clipping that. Bring that nice translucency of the wave back, make sure that I'm not blowing things out. So use this tone level again, just to kind of cement the ideas that are going on here. And now, before, after, wow. I mean, you can really start to see all of the stopped motion of this wave. You can really see the striations of that wave being created. Topaz Clarity is fantastic. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, black and white. So let me look at the clock. Oh, we're running out of time. So we're gonna, what are we gonna do? You know what, I always like to do this little technique for all those new viewers. I think it'll be worth using this image instead of the other. So let's go here. And let's go to Fusion Express again, and then we'll take some questions and see what you folks have that I've gone too fast on typically. Sorry, I like to try to cram in as much as I can. They do record these, and you'll be able to watch this at a later time. So let's just finish with another favorite piece of software from Topaz, and that's their black and white capability. And black and white effects 2, it's their newer version. And it's taken a little while because it's got to create all those wonderful presets. And by the way, the presets in the black and white are really great. So let's hit reset to make sure nothing's happening here. And just a quick overview here, you might want to go to something like a tone collection, and then you can kind of scroll through these and find what you want. But actually, I'm going to go to the traditional collection, and then you can kind of look through these and that way. Or if you click on the grid next to any of these, you'll get a much better way to look at these. So you can see them this way, much bigger preview. So selecting that grid can then help me see a better view. And then if I want to go to something like a warm tone, you just click on that large preview, and that's going to create the look that's already there. And the reason I wanted to just show you this real quickly before we end is look how great that is. I mean, it's crazy good. And if Nicole did these, kudos to you again, Nicole, because they're tremendous. But let's just take a real quick look through this because it's got so much more than presets. If I go through all of these, this is just like using color filters in the field up here at the top right. So I can do red, orange, yellow, green, and so forth, right? So I can choose to change that preset. And if I leave you with one thing in black and white, how cool is this? So not only do you have these 6 preset filters just like we use on our film days, but I have almost infinite control because I can bring the hue slider wherever I want and bring the strength. So rather than just these 6 choices, I can have anything on that color continuum, if you will, and play with this until my heart's content and change the strength of that color filter and whatever hue I want. Again, not just these 6. And then beyond that, you would then open, I would encourage you to open up the color sensitivity, and then you can play with just the individual colors and affect those however you might want to. Not much going on there. I think we might have the yellow will affect some things up on the roof, just a little bit there. The red is having a little effect on the door. We might get some blue happening here. Some blue is being affected. So not much more subtle. All depends on the colors that are in your image as to what's going to happen. And then one last thing I want to do here, because this is the one that's always so much fun, go down to your finishing touches. And the last one is called transparency. And this you can't do with most any other black and white software, but here we can. If I bring this all the way to the right, I can bring back some of the color and make it look like an old world type of photograph, which is great for Cuba, by the way. And I can tone that back a little bit even more and just have a little bit of that color from that original image showing through. One last little creative thing, I can even add some diffusion like we did in that portrait of Abigail. I can add some diffusion if I want to. If I go back up, once I do that, I might want to add some detail so I can come back to the adaptive. I'm going really fast, I get it, but I can add some detail back in with the adaptive exposure. Just quickly wanted to show you how robust this piece of software is. It's not just black and white presets, which it's really good at. It's got a ton of capability on the right side as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. That's a ton of information. People are loving the fact that you touched on all those.
Sorry, I feel like I did way too fast on black and white, but hey, they're recording it. You can watch it again, folks.
Absolutely. No, it was perfect. If you want to follow John, I definitely suggest you take a look at his blog on barclayphoto.com. some great imagery there, as well as where you can find out more information on his workshops. His Facebook page is John Barclay Photo, and Instagram is at John Barclay Photo. If you have any questions, you can contact us at webinars@topazlabs.com, and you can sign up for upcoming sessions at topazlabs.com/webinars. And thank you so much, John. This has been great.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back. Take care, folks.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.
That's right. Bye-bye.